It's quick, it's dirty, and it's one of the simplest ways I know how to cut a mortise. Yeah, 4K. I don't know that I can pull this off, guys. I'm feeling a little long in the tooth seeing every wrinkle of those 35 years, but here we are, YouTube in 2023. The mortise and tenon. One of the fundamental joints in woodworking, something that we all cut at some point in our career. The question is how to cut them accurately and efficiently. There's a myriad of techniques you could use, and any one of them is right. There's no right or wrong answer. But while there is no right or wrong, there are varying degrees of complexity, and I prefer simple 99 times out of 100. So I'm going to show you the fastest, simplest method I use to cut a mortise directly in the center of your board. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned last week, I'm currently in the midst of a trestle table build. Dining tables, as all tables, are mostly mortise and tenons. So what we're going to get to cutting today are the mortises that go in the header, which is the piece that attaches my leg assembly to the tabletop. So I've got the other header for the other side of my table leg. So I'm going to drop that in my vise. And the first thing I'm going to do is mark where my mortises need to go. Now, this is the router I'm using for this application. I get it. It's a Festool. Not everybody likes Festool. Festool's expensive. There's a whole myriad of things going on here. You don't need this router. You don't even need two fences. You don't even need a plunge router. You can do this with a trim router. I've done it with a trim router in the past, and just using a piece of wood and some double stick tape as a secondary fence, that works just fine. Is it slower? Yes. Is it a little bit more finicky? Yes. That's just the nature of making things work, but you can make it work. So that being said, let's look at how I set this up for center. So in reality, it's quite simple. I'm going to lower this down onto my workpiece and rotate my cutter head to see how the exterior parts of my blade hit the edges of my mortise. So I can move this back and forth until I'm lined up with the edges of my mortise, and then I can push my fence in, lock it in place, make sure that there's no lateral wiggle room left and right. That looks good. It feels good. It's sliding smooth. So that's the case. Now my mortise is perfectly centered and I can't go off center because it's locked in place. Now the next thing I need to do is set stops left and right so that I don't go past the ends of my mortise. Now you absolutely could just freehand this and watch as you go and bump up to your pencil line on either end of the piece. That's perfectly fine. I do that often, but because this is the internet and people want precision, we're gonna go ahead and set up stops. All I'm gonna do is rotate my cutter head 90 degrees so that the edge of the blade is over on this side. I'm going to lower it down, make sure it's touching my pencil line, and then I'm just gonna use a clamp to the board so that it's touching the router so that it's physically impossible for me to go past my pencil line. That's all that is. I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, just like that. Beautiful. Now the last thing I need to do is set my depth of cut. On this particular router and on most plunge routers, there is a gauge here. If you don't have a plunge router, or if you're using some kind of older plunge router that maybe doesn't have a gauge, You don't need that. You can kind of guess how deep you're going and then go down incrementally. Make sure you stop and measure. That's the thing I do when I use the trim router. You just make several passes and take your time so that you get down to final depth properly. And then once you've roughed out all of your mortises, you can set that final depth and go in and clean them all up very easily. All right. Enough jibber jabber. Let's make some cuts. All right, so you can see I've hit my pencil line perfectly on either side thanks to my stops. I'm gonna check my depth. I am at a perfect 1 1/4, which is exactly where I wanna be. So, with our mortises cut and looking beautiful, the next question, of course, is how to cut this tenon. Now, just like mortises, there are innumerable ways to cut tenons. You can cut them on the bandsaw, you can cut them on the table saw, you can cut them with a router jig. Last week, I made a video about making a tenoning jig for the table saw, which I used to cut these tenons. If you want to go check that out, I'll leave a link up in, I never remember which corner, one of the corners. I'll leave a link up nearby for you to go check that out. However, in the name of efficiency, I'm going to show you a different way that I cut these larger tenons just because it's a little bit faster, and of course, being a professional furniture maker, time and efficiency are important. Not everything, but they are important. So let me show you how I'm going to cut these tenons. Yes, the shaper origin. Now, is it everybody's cup of tea? No, of course. I get that. I respect that. If you want to make tenons another way, do what makes you happy. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm using this machine to cut tenons simply because it's efficient for me as a professional to get the job done. Now, I will also answer the question right here, right now. Couldn't I have just used this to cut the mortises? Yes, absolutely. And I do often, but not that many people own this machine, so it wouldn't have been helpful for you if you just watched me use a tool that you don't own. So I wanted to give you a real-life application for the garage woodworker, for the home shop, that I've used many, many times. It's a very, very efficient way to cut mortises. This is just a different way. Now let's cut some tenons. Let's give it a test fit. Perfect. All right, now with all of our components cut, let's do a dry fit. B goes to B. Line her up. Now this is the one we just cut. So, A, and A, and moment of truth. So friends, as you can see, that's this week's video. Quick, dirty mortises, easy. There's no real tangible difference in the quality of the mortise that I cut, whether it was done with the Shaper Origin or with the quick centering method using the dual fence. So, I hope it was interesting. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was educational. And I can finally, like, this thing's moving along. It's moving along. The build video for this is gonna come along soon enough. But until next week, friends, go out there and make a thing. Cheers. Might be kind of a sexy table.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
It's not bad.
The more I look at it, the more I'm like, it might actually work.